with the audio-visual setup. It's going to go amiss, especially when you're talking about a very strange subject, such as the Djinn. That is my topic today. I've written a book called The Vengeful Djinn. I'm a full-time paranormal investigator and author. I research hauntings, mysterious places, entity contact experiences. And some years ago in my investigations, I became convinced that in many of our situations, we are dealing with a little-known entity called the Djinn. Actually, they've been around since ancient times, along with a lot of other entities that we're more familiar with. We're just not very familiar with them in our culture. I came to the conclusion that they are very active among us, not just in haunted situations, but in attachments to people, in possessions, and that a lot of activity is going on right in this state, in West Virginia. In fact, the whole terrain, the history, the ambience, the atmosphere of West Virginia is very conducive to hiding places for the Djinn. And in fact, there may be a very strong connection between Mothman and the Djinn. So the talk that I'm going to give today is going to explain the Djinn, their origins, a little bit about their background, their characteristics, how they're interacting with us, and how the whole Mothman wave, with all of its attendant phenomena, may have been related to Djinn activity. And hopefully this is going to, there we go, yes, it does work. Now, the Djinn originate in Middle Eastern mythology and folklore, but that doesn't limit them geographically. Just because a certain culture develops a mythology about alien beings, beings in other dimensions, does not mean they are limited to a certain part of the world. The same as we would not expect fairies just to be in Celtic countries, because that's where the biggest folklore about them has originated. So the Djinn really are everywhere. They're everywhere around the planet. And the deeper I go in my research, and the more I talk to people who have had experiences with these very mysterious, very powerful, and very tricky entities, it has become very apparent to me that they are quite active among human beings. They have agendas to pursue, and we simply don't know much about what's going on, because most of us in the Western culture don't even think about the Djinn. In fact, sometimes people have never even heard about the Djinn and know nothing about them. This is from the remake of Clash of the Titans, which actually was a very good presentation about the Djinn and their supernatural powers as desert dwellers in the Middle East. This is the book that just came out this year, The Vengeful Djinn, and it talks about the mythological origins of the Djinn, some of the material that I'm going to be covering today, and talks about how the Djinn are masquerading as shape-shifted entities that we're very familiar with today. That some of the entities that we feel are angel experiences or fairy experiences, ETs, even mysterious creatures like Mothman and Bigfoot, might in fact be the Djinn in disguise. This is a website that I set up called Djinn Universe, which is an educational website. I wanted to mention it now because it's a great place to go to get further resources for reading other websites. And I also have an interactive section to it where people are sharing their comments and experiences about the Djinn, people from all over the world, all cultures, different religions, and some of the stories are indeed quite chilling. And almost every day I get new material to post on that page. Well, a lot of what we know about the Djinn comes from these old folk tales in the Middle East. And some of the images that I'm going to be showing you today are representations of descriptions of the Djinn from games, from movies, films, the Arabian Nights folk tales. But they're most often associated with the entity that we know as the genie in the bottle. And in fact, that's where the word genie comes from the name of the actual race of beings, the Djinn. They can come in all shapes and sizes. They're usually considered to be quite ferocious, much more powerful than human beings, and very, very tricky to deal with. They have existed since ancient times. They were here on this planet before we were. And in fact, that's why some of the problems now exist between them and us. These are some of the illustrations from old editions of the Arabian Nights folktales. Maybe you read some of those, especially when you were a kid. The story of Aladdin and his lamp, for example. The entity who comes out of a trap in a vessel and is obliged to perform favors for the person who releases him. Well, that's part of the folk tale about the Djinn, but there's really much more to their story than that. They can be big, they can be small. Regardless of their size, they have the ability to keep human beings off balance. There are a lot of similarities between the Djinn and accounts that we have of interactions with ETs. Human beings are off balance with ETs. They seem to have the upper hand. They seem to want something from us. They come and approach us when we are most vulnerable, emotionally, physically, when we're sleeping. They seem to be able to influence us in ways that we have very little control over. The same thing exists with the Djinn. Now, their name literally means the hidden ones. And I mentioned that they were here on this planet before human beings. In fact, they considered this place to be theirs. They have lifespans, according to lore, for thousands of years. In many respects, they're a lot like human beings. They're organized into families and societies. They can have offspring. They have supernatural powers that we do not have. They have a very tricky nature to them. They have a very low regard for human beings, many of them. And like the fairies, are inclined to mess around with us, sometimes just to play tricks, sometimes to cause a lot of havoc and problems. They're very good at shape-shifting. They can imitate any form. They can be beautiful, they can be ugly, they can be totally weird in ways that would very much upset human beings. And one of their dominant traits is that they are very vengeful when wronged. And we do find this in other entity interactions as well. That when human beings come along and commit offenses against these residents of other dimensions, we get retribution in return. Now, the fairies, for example, are famous for causing rack and ruin to people who upset them in various ways, such as building a house on their fairy track or spying on them when they're out in the woods. And the Djinn are the same way. They take action against human beings very easily with very little provocation. And this is a factor in a lot of intensely haunted places, which I think are not caused by demonic entities or other troubling entities. They're caused by the Djinn. And I have been researching cases in this state, long-term, intense, haunted locations where the dominant presence has been identified as a Djinn, and it's not going anywhere. They're very difficult to dislodge. Now, most of what we know about the Djinn, as I mentioned, comes from the Arabian Nights folktales. There are two ways that the Djinn came into our culture and sort of slid below the radar so that we don't really take them seriously as a supernatural force. The Arabian Nights portray them as these beings who form out of mists and smoke. They're imprisoned in vessels like lamps, and someone comes along and rubs the lamp or gives the right incantation. It releases this entity who then grants the person 3 wishes or a number of wishes in exchange for its liberation. And true to the trickster nature of the Djinn, the wishes don't really go well. Like the first wish might be fabulous and very beneficial. The second wish, not so good, because depending on how you word the wish, the Djinn will find a way to get around it and turn it upside down. And then people often use their last wish to undo the other wishes. But Arabian Nights is full of stories, however, of wish-granting Djinn who bestow all kinds of favors on people. Now, these are different variations of the term Djinn. Jinni is often a singular term. Many people, like myself, prefer Djinn for singular and plural. Genie is the derivative that we have gotten in the English language. And Janaya is a term that's often used for a female Djinn. Now, an example from these old folk tales was represented very well in this 1940 film called The Thief of Baghdad. And I just wanted to show you a few scenes from this film, because for 1940s, the special effects were pretty good. But a young man finds a mysterious bottle on the beach and opens it up, and this mist comes out and forms into this giant creature, this genie, who first of all, he's very angry at being imprisoned in this thing for thousands of years, but he's obliged to repay the favor for his liberation. And he makes a lot of threats. He says, you know, I'm so big, I'm so powerful, I could literally destroy you, and I might do that. But the young boy reminds him that he is obliged to return the favor, and so the story revolves around how the wishes work out. And fortunately for the boy, things work out pretty well in the end. But you can imagine how they made some of the props for this movie. Today it's all done on computers, done very well, but back then it was a pretty good representation of this supernatural entity. Here are some more scenes from Arabian Nights, different guises for the genies. Now, the other way that the Djinn came into our culture, and again slipped below the radar, was through the story of King Solomon, who is a biblical figure. In fact, for a long time, however, historians were actually divided on whether or not King Solomon actually existed. Was he more legend or was he fact? And now the consensus is that, yes, this person actually existed. He was the son of David. He's written about in the Bible. He was the second king of Israel. He had great power and great wisdom. God bestowed many favors upon him. He bestowed upon him the gift of discernment and the gift of having power over all the spirits. The spirits were commanded through a magical ring that Solomon had. He could summon them and force them to bend to his will. And one of the things that King Solomon wanted to do was build this huge temple of Jerusalem. In fact, he's credited with building the city of Jerusalem as well. The labor for this was absolutely incredible. The numbers of people and slaves that would have to be employed. So what Solomon did was he summoned up the Djinn and enslaved them. Now, in some translations of this text, and this is one of the reasons for the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, which was housed inside the temple, the Holy of Holies, an interface between human beings and God. But Solomon summoned up the Djinn and set them to work making the temple. Now, translations of this story usually say that he summoned up the demons or the spirits, but the correct form of this is the Djinn. They were Djinn, not demons, and there is a difference between Djinn and demons. They are not the same. Now, the story is told in a text outside the Bible called the Testament of Solomon, which was written in the first few centuries after Christ, and it did not make it into the Bible along with a lot of other texts for various reasons. Either the authorship could not be authenticated, or the historical content of it could not be validated, or it just simply didn't conform with the emerging dogma of the early church. But the story is left out of the Bible as to how Solomon accomplished the building of the temple, but it is explained in detail in this text that these entities were enslaved for the entire lifetime of King Solomon to do this work. And then he would do things in the text, make them dance and perform and tell about themselves. This was another way of subjugating and controlling these entities. Well, all of this magical wisdom that Solomon possessed after his death, and upon his death, the Djinn were freed from their slavery, passed into our culture through the magical tradition. Now, unless you are a practitioner of magic, you're likely not to come up against any references to the Djinn. But the methods for summoning and controlling all kinds of entities, and originally they were Djinn. They are referred to now as spirits, sometimes angels or demons. Went into magical texts like this. They're called grimoires, and they were written anywhere from antiquity up until the 18 and 1900s. A lot